Good evening everyone. Welcome to Tate Modern. Thank you for your patience. My name is Noura Rezian. I'm curator of public programs here, and I'm delighted tonight to welcome the multiple award-winning architect Zaha Hadid in conversation with Achim Borchardt-Hume. I will give a very brief introduction to Zaha, although she doesn't need one. Zaha Hadid is founder of Zaha Hadid Architects and was awarded the Pritzker Architecture Prize in 2004. Each of her pioneering projects builds on over 30 years of explorations and research in the fields of urbanism, architecture, and design. Hadid completed her first building, the Vitra Fire Station, in 1993. She is currently a professor at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Tonight, Zaha will talk about the intimate link between her work and Malevich's Suprematism, which has spanned her entire career, beginning with Malevich's Tectonic, her graduation thesis for the Architecture Association in 1977, and up to her recent design and curating of an exhibition at the Gallery Muzhinska in Zurich that juxtaposed her own work with early 20th century Russian art pieces. After Zaha's talk, she'll be in conversation with Achim Borchardt-Hume, head of exhibitions at Tate Modern and curator of the Malevich exhibition. After their discussion, there will be time for questions from the floor as well. Thank you very much, and please welcome Zaha.
Talking about Malevich and my work is always feels as if going back to my childhood. Roger, can I have this machine actually, because I can move fast through this. Where is forward? This one?
No. Forward, back.
This one forward?
Yeah.
This is not a very logical machine. You would think forward is up and backward is down, but no, this is left and right. So, let me go back. This is the Malevich painting, not the original one. The original one was mostly damaged, but then ours was purchased for SF MoMA. This is the current state of my apartment. And everybody wonders why this painting is slanted. Not because we can't cut properly, but because this was at the Guggenheim. It was almost a replica of my old painting, but slightly more distorted at the Guggenheim. It's in the Guggenheim because of the ramps, therefore it is a slant. Some of the, I think, influential pieces of Malevich is the idea of liberation from gravity, composition, color. This is one of the, I was a student at the AA in the mid-70s. This was in 76. Ram Koolhaas and Inez Inez were my tutors, and they gave that program to do a project on the Malevich tectonic superimposed on the one in New York, one in London. The hint that that work of Malevich could become an architecture was because of this collage of the tectonic on the New York skyline. And so I, at the time, took on the horizontal tectonic. Many of the others did the vertical one. And it was an exquisite corpse, which means that every person needs other Malevich compositions of kind of flotation or cities in the skies or in the atmosphere or in the universe, this idea of cities kind of divorced from our force fields. Other influences, for example, Lisitsky and Leonidov on how to interpret or translate Suprematism into architecture. The Lenin Library of Leonidov, and going back to these compositional creations by Malevich. Some of these exhibitions which done by the many years at the time. But anyway, I go back to the tectonic, and the tectonic, Eli and Ram had given this program, and it was each of the students took a segment of the tectonic and superimposed it like a exquisite corpse. But I decided to do the horizontal one. There was only one other student who was doing it with me. And I decided to do it on London because I've always been, even almost 40 years ago, I had an interest in London and how London could be transformed through new architecture. And this superimposition of the tectonic on the Hungerford Bridge, I can show that a bit later, how these two but the idea was if you insert a program into the tectonic and give it a location and urbanize it, it becomes an architecture. So it no longer becomes a kind of sculptural piece, but it becomes an architectonic. There's a show in Moscow done by Malevich. There's a show we did at the Guggenheim, and this is a show here with me in it. I'm finally found my home in the Malevich kind of composition. These are structures in space. This is our show at the Guggenheim. And our show at the Guggenheim, we try to create, to kind of really have a take on the idea of podiums and on the idea of, how the things can float within a space. And so we did, I did not, what they did at the Guggenheim and the show previous to this one in Germany, they put a kind of a pedestal under each one of these objects. And I thought that, that was really not working. So the idea was to create these domes or half surfaces where these globes will float over. Roger. It's stuck. Can you go to your laptop and play with it? Thank you very much. Let's see. I don't think so.
This one?
Technology is not perfect, unfortunately. Yeah, these are some of the, I think we missed a lot of things, but let me just go back. Roger, can you go there, please? Roger's very shy. Doesn't want to be seen in public. So, this is Roger, and he has a new name now. He was a press person, but he's graduated to something else recently. Can we go back a few slides? One more? Okay, next please. And the idea for the Guggenheim show was to occupy the central space of the Guggenheim with two major objects, one with the Tatlin Tower, which was abstracted. So this is an abstraction of an abstraction, and the other one is a kind of a curved tectonic which occupies all the ramps. Next, please. Showing some of the ramps, now back, please. How these kind of zigzags appear to show some of the pieces on the show. There were many pieces in the Great Utopia show at the Guggenheim. And it was a very unique moment at the Guggenheim to be able to borrow these pieces when all the republics have kind of become friendly with the West, and they were under one central government, but before the republics were broken up into different pieces. So they were able to borrow many of these pieces. And apparently, not known to me, after we did the show, there was apparently a study by Frank Lloyd Wright showing that you can occupy the ramps with things like a concertina or a kind of a paravan. Next, please. The red square was hung in the one of the only gallery which has no ramping, whatever it's called something. There were two pieces hung there, but what was interesting about because nobody has hung a painting on that level, that this painting became almost like the sun. So to go back to the victory of the sun, it's almost like the sun. Wherever you moved in the ramps, you can see this piece following you. Next. That's the same show as in the one in Russia. There's 5x5, where all the paintings were hung on kind of popovas and so on plastic walls, so they can, when you are looking in front of you, they can be seen as a continuous field. And also, next, the Radchenko drawings, which were very difficult to always see against white. We put them on black, and you actually begin to see the composition of black on the black wall. Next. Then the white on white paintings by Malevich, which are also here. And some of other kind of really compositions where we did all the tables and stuff like that. This is the next show, which is our own show at the Guggenheim, with our own drawings and paintings. Next. And instead of the red square, we hung the peak model, so it also follows you around, which is in that corner. A show which came much later, the Guggenheim show was almost 8 years ago. This was maybe 2-3 years ago, the Magic Gallery Majinska, don't move. rather, of the idea of the explosion. So the idea of explosion, creating kind of as an explosion in space, reappears in my work and many times over compositions. And the impact of the Malevich work on me was not only in the way we did the three-dimensional drawings or in the way we thought about gravitational forces, but also the way it impacted on the reorganization of the plan. And that was, I think, the most important component. So this is another explosion in the gallery where it's a composition of the interior and the exterior at the same time. So the idea was to show some of our work with the Malevich paintings and other Russian work. So this is one of our tables with some of our sketches and the Malevich installation. Next. So this is the kind of almost the Guggenheim installation coming back to the Majinsky Gallery. Some of drawings drawn in metal. Can you just go through that? So we go back to the Malevich tectonic again. Next. Some of these early drawings of my portfolio. So the idea was to, as I said, to kind of really invade this object with a program. And the two things which occur here is the idea of the superimposition of clear water, which was in the tectonic, over dirty water of the Thames. This was going to be like a kind of a combination of all the programs which were given to us that year, which was a social condenser. So it was like like workers club, but this was not obviously a workers club. So the top slab was water, and then there was a kind of a pool house or a sauna or whatever, and then the rest of it is apartments and hotels. And the first thing that occurred was the idea of layering, which became a method of work for us in the office. And the other one was the shipwreck, and you can see it in the bottom hand. I originally did this in my fourth year. I don't have the drawings, unfortunately, but they were atrocious. And I was teased about them for many years. But the idea was there, the idea of the shipwreck as a way to design this nightclub. And I came back to this project a year later to design the nightclub as a shipwreck. Next, please. Next. So this is on the Thames. And if you go through these slides, so this is going through two things: layering horizontally, and then also slicing through the object, vertically. So you can go back. So we go back to all these different elements, which was like an exquisite corpus, but it's not, and showing the hotel at the top, then apartments, all the kind of parking and so on. Next, please. And then we began interpretation of how these objects begin to arrive on the site. Next. And then we moved on to the 19th Century Museum, which took on some of the things. It was the choice for the Malevich tectonic on the Hungerford Bridge was my choice, but this was given as a project. So this is a museum from the 19th century, which starts on Charing Cross, and like not a shipwreck, but like a train wreck, arrives on the footsteps of the 20th century at the Royal Festival Hall and so on. So these are showing also different ways of drawing. That was also very important, which also started in my fourth year, how to represent the work, which was at the time I thought, I could not describe this work in the way we all learn how to draw, like through axiometric or whatever. So I began to look at different perspectival projections. Next, please. So this is kind of the shipwreck. So there's a hotel which is over a diagonal over the whole of the Charing Cross station, and then the museum on 19th century showing all the kind of 19th century objects straddling the Thames. Next. So this shows also the system of layering. So this is every layer, every of these plots on the diagonal shows a different kind of world, maybe remnants or whatever. And I think the idea in terms of archaeology of layering started with this project. Next, please. This is a composition. So another thing which occurs is that the compositions, like a suprematism composition of the plan is longer, just showing kind of functional spaces, but shows sort of certain, maybe programs in the building. This shows both projects, so this shows right at the bottom where you show all on the wall, all on your wall, the structure. Next. Next, so this shows every layer. There's like a scattered column grid, a scattered also elevators and so on. So the idea of fragmentation and scattering of the object within the field also becomes another mode of working. So this is kind of the different mode of drawings. That is the section how it collapses on the floor. And this, can you go back? This shows really the impact of the building right through the excavation on the side where all the vaults are of the station. Next. Yeah, so this is kind of drawing, three-dimensional drawing showing each of the spaces. And this is the other explosion which occurred after that, which is for the House of Parliament in The Hague. So it's no longer a diagram or a drawing, but actually it was a drawing exploding. And that I think was one of my, for me, very influential drawing, where you segment all the parts of the interior of this project, or different segment of the project. And I think the idea, the explosion project becomes a project later on in my kind of career. The explosion of the Eaton Place, where all the objects of the house arrive in London. So showing the beds of the interiors, all the interior objects. And then the kind of the Irish house. They were almost done in Knock on Your Back. So I'm flipping through this book very quickly. So two things occur. Can you stop? One which is, can you go back? Which one can you go back? Can you go back one more time? Thank you. One is the idea of erosion, which will appear in our work much later. Next. So this is the composition. The existing walled garden was an existing garden in Dublin, in Phoenix Park, and the idea to create a state guest house and a prime minister's house. But the state guest house has a kind of triangular space, next, which becomes the great kind of guest room. And so the idea that the kind of guests, who are all the politicians, are, using that kind of playful courtyard. So these are different compositions of the prime minister's house. And then this is the final composition. So this is the courtyard where two things float in and out. And, of course, two things occur, the idea of flotation and also of carving. If you can go back to it, Roger. So as you peel it, this was photographed today because the offs lost on my slides, which is not a very untypical problem. I spend all my time to find things. There's a whole exhibition department. We have no archiving. So I was going on all day about the triangle. Anyway, so this is the idea of the courtyard. So it also refers to, in a way, composition of Malevich, of kind of the what I call the whoosh, but it's not a gradated. Next. And the house eventually becomes this, and these are the fragments of the house, certain pieces. Can you go through this? Yeah, other studies. So this is the final composition. No, you missed out on something, unfortunately. Okay, well, you did miss out on something. Are you looking surprised, Roger? Yeah, okay. That's what happens when you do a slide lecture in a car. Things get lost. This is another of, I think, drawing which is, for me, very important, which was a composite, which means that all the layers of the project are on one level. So the ground, the first floor, whatever it is all on one plane. Next. People at the time I did this project didn't mind that it was chaotic, but they did mind that the tennis court, can you go back? The tennis court was not like a tennis court. And there was a very famous story. This project was shown at the A in the basement of what used to be the restaurant. And Alvin Boyarsky, who gave me a whole space, much to everybody's anger, he had two American students looking at this and saying, "My God, this guy has balls," and not knowing that it wasn't a guy. There were lots of guys who worked on it, and they had balls too. Next, please. This kind of faint is also all the aerial views. So then, also the other inspiration was all the photography and composition of the Russian avant-garde, which were kind of, many of them were very aerial. Next. Can you go through this? These are all the mock-up, all the studies of all the line drawings of the Irish house. So they post, like the composite of this, post the sketches. Can you go through this quickly, Roger? This was a catalog we did for the show in Amsterdam in '81, which was based on the Irish house. Then there are all the peak sketches. Next, please. Can you go through this? Also, that's what I call supremative geology. Can you go back? Which is also a composite. I had a word which called tick-tick. Can you go back? So all these little pieces are tick-ticks. But unfortunately, tick-tick graduated to something else later, which I wouldn't dare mention what it was in public. Certain people who knew me well knew what it meant. I said a tick-tick is everything which had potential of motion. So these are also a very layered project. These are kind of the line drawing which followed. Next. Can you go through these? The major paintings which set up the idea of the project on the landscape of Hong Kong and how the city was layered and so on. And then the peak model. Next. Other project which I did post that, which is the rooftops in London, all to do with idea of flotation. This is also certain urban projects were influenced by the idea of movement. And what began to occur in this drawing in terms of composition was that the composition began to become fluid. So these are like 5 segments of the city around Trafalgar Square, and they're all connected seamlessly. So the idea of seamlessness through drawings first, but then through the idea of the project began to occur. Next. Another London drawing. I've been always obsessed with London. This is Berlin. Also, the layers are no longer, the layers are no longer just layers on the plan, but they're layers in the city. So you have an area which is excavated, you have a middle level, which all the kind of commercial area and the idea that certain housing or a hotel floats above. This is a great drawing by Malevich. I'm not sure it's in the show. No. So this idea of the drawing of the stripes becomes an over-interpretation for another project in Hamburg. And the idea of the layers of the building both way. So the idea of the bookshelf becoming composite drawing of all the different slabs. So we began to specialize in many things, like mini slabs. I call them slabettes. Next. And this is also his other drawing, which kind of whirl around, showing all the drawings in the same page, so a storyline. They're more like a storyline as opposed to really representation. Next. And another, I think, important moment is when we began to, through sketches, which of course the others have lost, Woody has to find them, spend all night digging them out. The idea of the landmass. So the landmass, if you see there's very big objects, so the idea that this replace kind of normative buildings, and then we can use landmass or land formation to do very large programs. Next, please. Including Cardiff Opera House, 20-year anniversary. Cincinnati, the idea of the gradation of spaces and the Islamic Museum in Qatar. Also graphic representation in the car park and station in Strasbourg. So the idea you can actually make the space a graphic space. The first of the landscape project, the land formation near Vannemaan, next to Vitra, on the other side of Vitra. The idea of carving as in valleys for the Quebec Library. Colliding landscapes, which was also a diagram for the Islamic Museum, but later becomes sort of a diagram for Rome. The multi-layering of all the different spaces and colliding of spaces, and how that shift from the street began to influence the field. The idea of moving from the object to the field, and then the field becomes part of the urbanism of the city, and how it relates to the existing context, the two historic context and, well, it's not very old pieces, but, and the new one, and all the different layers. The striation, as in the field previously shown, as rigs of the ribs of the roof on the ceiling. Another kind of elastic piece in Miami. And that kind of influenced this kind of valley of spaces and Soho, China, and in Beijing, and how these different layers show how one can move from one place to the other. The project in Seoul, disguised as a kind of landmass. Baku, with 3 different programs converging into one. And this is our kind of recent project opened last week, 2 weeks ago. Next, is that it? That's the last slide? Thank you. The last is Soho, also Soho, China, Wanjing, which is the idea of 3 mountains, abstracted obviously as a series of towers. Thank you very much.
Just while we're waiting for the other slideshow to come on, first of all, I should say thank you very much, because it was very interesting. And I think part of why we were so thrilled to have you here with us is that the subtitle or strapline for the exhibition is called Malevich, Revolutionary in Russian Art. In a way, you could actually take Russian art because he's a revolutionary in art. And you're revolutionary in architecture. And what is very interesting is to, particularly with regard to a historic artist, to try and somehow come into the living idea rather than the historic material. And we will maybe try to do that a little bit more through the notion of analogies. So if I talk a little bit about some of the works in the exhibition, in a way we're going to do a very brief walk through the exhibition, but in a different way from how you actually see it upstairs, all centered around a question, and then maybe you have some thoughts to offer on that from your point of view. If technology doesn't fail us, as usual.
Get Roger to do it. Roger has the green finger. Roger, please help.
I think he's very glad to be out of the limelight.
That's why I don't touch these things, because I don't have a green finger. People in the office, I'll tell stories now. They used to, don't allow me to touch a model. They've been working on for a few nights because it will eventually get broken. Either because I drop it or because I don't like it. So I was not allowed. Or drawings.
And how do we get to see this?
That's why Woody has learned a very nice habit of hiding things from me in case I damage them. Okay.
I think I have to learn from that. I think I have to learn about the dropping if you don't like it. Right.
Well, some of those I really liked a lot. I didn't dare damage them.
Let's start at the beginning of the show. So the first idea is when East meets West, which is a very cliched way of phrasing things. But I think it's a very important part to the beginning of the exhibition and to the idea of how Malevich's work evolves. This is a work from 1907, 1908. You can see the influence of Buddhism in this. There's a sense of Malevich's awakening spirituality and his mysticism in works like this one. Interestingly enough, when they get shown upstairs, we always tell the story commonly that the big motivation really is that Malevich is in Russia and he for the first time comes into contact with Western ideas of modernity. What we never talk about is that Russia actually was a West and actually was very open to much further East, and ideas flowed in a very interesting way between the two. In a way, you are a border walker between different cultures from the very beginning. How do you experience that?
Well, I think that I think it's very interesting. I mean, I was brought up in Iraq, and which was at the time very Western, and I have a friend, Rizet, who her sister was a friend of mine in school. We all went to a nun school. I was Muslim, she was Jewish. Well, she's still Jewish, and I'm still Muslim. And there were lots of Christian girls. And there was never, ever this idea there was any difference. And Baghdad was like that, you know. We were talking yesterday at a dinner. There was a very famous Iraqi singer, which we all forgot her name. You have to ask her dad, Lizette, who was a Jewish singer. And it turned out to be she was somebody's mistress. She was also married to a very, very well-known musician. And all our neighbors were all different religions. There was never a problem. And, you know, a certain part of that society was very westernized. My father went to LSE in the 30s. So we didn't think about this. But we also had Eastern traditions, you know, and which were under the umbrella of Islam, although I wasn't religious. You know, I took a tremendous, I was not very happy about Rowan Moore saying I'm an atheist, because I'm not. And, but because he had privy to my, I considered to be a friend, he decided to air some of these things which came up in conversations to the public, which is not really appropriate. Anyway, so I think that it was a very mixed bunch, kind of mixed people, and we traveled a lot. And these lines between all these things, of course, you know, I mean, we had a different lifestyle, but it wasn't very strange being here. But of course, there were certain traditions which always were misunderstood in the West, which were not, which were Eastern traditions. They were adopted by the different religions. You know, I couldn't say they were Muslim or Christians or whatever, but they were adopted by different religions. But we all adhere to them, certain protocols or behaviors or things done and not done. But I couldn't say that coming to the West, you know, was a big shock to me. I mean, somebody once asked me, a German journalist asked me, how did I get here? And I said, by aeroplane. And because she meant, you know, you are an Arab, sort of retarded, and you've made a leap. She didn't quite phrase it like that, but that was the, intention. So I think what is interesting is some of these traditions become kind of really much more fluid, and they overlap on camouflage. And by the end of it, you don't really know what your background is, whether it comes from here to there. The other thing which I think is very interesting is that for us who are kind of displaced, although when I left Iraq there was no war, so-called, but you are displaced, and that displacement actually gives you enormous freedom, because of course you also pay the price. People don't know why you're behaving a certain way, because you are just nuts, or because you are a woman, or because you're an Arab or a foreigner or whatever. But it does give you freedom, because you don't have to abide by certain rules. And similar to the Malevich situation, where the rules of, this idea of mysticism and the whole obsession with space, that obsession frees you from certain laws, earthly laws. So when you say it like that, it sounds religious. But actually, when it's scientific, it doesn't have to be like that. And I found this displacement very liberating, because honestly, I couldn't care less. But I had to pay the price for being like that. But they kept on punishing me. But I must say, every time they did, that made me a bit stronger. And also, through that, I gained tremendous support. And it is that support which enabled me to make the next move.
That is a very good segue into the next topic, which is true to self, because I think what you just described, the situation of different things coming together, but then developing a sense of who you actually are, this was hugely important to Malevich. So after he had come into contact with Western modernity, with his ideas, he began to work with a group of his peers, people like Goncharova and Larionov, and they became very aware that they had their own Russian heritage, which was only recently being discovered as an artistic heritage. And one of the things which I found very striking when I talked to somebody in Moscow about this was that she pointed out that what these artists did was to refuse having to make a choice. It wasn't that they couldn't, or that they were torn between these different ideas, but they refused. And instead of which they basically said, we wanted both, we want to be modern, and we want to be true to the place we come from, and we need to find our own voice. So this whole conundrum of finding your own voice and staying true to yourself.
I think it was very important. I think that, I'm sure, I can only talk about myself. And I'm sure they have the same thing, which is that I had no other choice. It wasn't that there were, people are always saying to me, why are you wasting your time, especially my brothers. Not my parents. My parents always thought, my father was always so revolutionary, so he didn't mind me being totally nuts, or not doing something which is so-called practical. My brothers, who were British trained, went to English boarding schools, went to Cambridge, so on, could not understand why I was doing these things. They eventually, of course, came to it, but I had no choice. I knew there was another alternative, and that's what I wanted to kind of prove or achieve, or whatever. I think that many call it very stubborn or foolish, but I don't know whether it was worthwhile. But I think that's what it was. That was the condition we were in. And I think because I was brought up in Iraq in the 60s, where many changes occurred, and some of them to the better, some of them to the worse. To the better was, because of the government being socialist, they allowed, they built a lot of housing for the peasantry who were moved to Baghdad from the south, who had no home. They were living in kind of huts, and that was a very important program. The other program which was very important was education, that nobody should be illiterate, everybody should be learn how to read and write, everyone went to school. And I can give you an example of somebody who used to work in our house who came to us when he was very young, 13. He couldn't read and write. He didn't have a home. So we kind of took him on, like adopted him. And his family, all his kids went to college. In one generation, all his kids went to college. They all have homes, houses. They all became like managers in factories or teachers in schools and so on. And that was a very radical shift from somebody who they didn't know how to do anything. And they had no. And that was, I think, that was the power of these revolutionary ideas. And that's why I did understand that change was very important. And you can achieve it through not just perseverance, but through discovery. And it was a part of the research. In the same way, these kind of studies of the Russian avant-garde were studies of these worlds, in these new worlds. Yeah. And maybe they did not finally make it because it was abruptly stopped by Stalin, and the revolution kind of semi-ended. But you see kind of glimpses of them, of course, through the influence on contemporary or kind of modern painters, like Ellsworth Kelly. I know people don't like to say that, but I mean the Cluins and all these pieces are very similar, and so yeah.
Before we come to the sort of avant-garde work, the abstract work, the idea of structure, because I think one of the things which fundamentally changes then for Malevich very soon is that he thinks about structure in his paintings in a very, very different way. So there's a painting like this one, the Snowy Landscape. Cubism gets adopted. And this really shows a massive shift from one type of painting to another one. This idea of actually, I was very struck when you showed your images of the plans of London and Berlin and how to actually think about the structure of a space or how to hold something together.
Well, I mean, I think that, as I said, you know, for me, the most important influence was reorganization of the plan, you know. At the time we were students, there was two dominating forces. The dogma of modernism, you know, how the modernist, and the idea of typology. And the other one was the shift at the mid-70s to historicism. So an idea to adopt from historic figures and things. And the intention was to re-look at idea of organization, that you don't have a building, for example, that it doesn't have a front or a back, that it's, you know, it's all round, the idea of fragmenting the structure. But that led to not breaking of the structure, but led to idea of using structural elements to free the space, which could be done through like civil engineering methodology, like ramps and cantilevers or dams or whatever. So this was never used, not much used in building, it was used in infrastructural projects. So the idea of commission of infrastructure, ramping and infrastructure and building, the idea to free the diagram. And the other thing was typology, that there isn't a single given typology to any program. That was also a misdemeanor. I mean, the idea that every library should have one type. Every museum was one type. You couldn't divert from the typology of the 19th century, basically. And so the composition was very important, how to free the plan, but not in the same way the modernists did. I mean, it was also very important that one learned from the modernists, but how to free. Roger, you're not tweeting, are you? No. No, thank you. You can see I love Roger. He has discovered tweeting. I don't tweet, but he tweets on my behalf.
We're live at the moment on social media. The breaking up the structure, I wish this section were called Tick Tick after your comments. Defying logic, which is what happened next, that Malevich actually well, just didn't accept the rules of representation and just did all kinds of things which allegedly weren't possible. Inserted, well, there were others like Rosanova, but inserted these color planes into still life. They have no rhyme or reason what they're doing there, really. Language was hugely important at that junction, hence my particular like. You used two actually moments. One was tick-tick, one was whoosh. So twice that you use words which, you know, describe
I think it took me years to explain to people what I meant. But tick-tick was really picked on a lot. And whoosh was the gradation. Yeah.
But defying logic. So, because we always think that modernism is rational, but actually very often it isn't.
No, it's not. Well, I think that another thing, which is that I think there was this idea that there's one rationale, which is kind of Western rationale, and there was no other logics. And I think that that's why the idea of the explosion or a chaos, but of course chaos is under equilibrium because it's in the canvas, so to speak. It's not like we can't make these things floating in space. Maybe eventually, but not at the time. But certain kind of techniques, Pentily techniques, which honestly I'm not knowing that others use them, which I use, showed certain things in the real building. I used to do these like whooshes in white of a black drawing, but like maybe one whoosh. And honestly, I was once in Weihnachten. It was pitch black in for that project known as Garanschau. Because there's no other building next to it, the whole field was black. But because it was moonlight, one of the surfaces which were curved became like a whoosh. So that was for me more exciting because suddenly reality becomes like the drawing. And there's another moment when I was flying from Chicago, from Racine, you know, where Frank Lloyd Wright has Johnson wax. And people wondered for years about that tower with the tubes. And of course, if you go in, you can't see nothing. And it was very deliberate because there was nothing to see. It's so awful. So he literally blocked you out. He blocked the city from the inside. But of course, the columns were very beautiful. I was flying back. It was middle of winter. It was freezing cold. I had done many years ago these drawings. People thought I was crazy. Why would I paint the rivers in red? People thought, you know, I was a communist. You know, I said, no, it catches the light. No, they thought. That shot was literally a literal drawing of ours, where the rivers were red because of the light, all the fields were snow, were white. It was like the negative drawing. And that was the reality. It's a shame I don't take photographs. You know, that was really amazing. That was also for me a very exciting moment. So in these kind of worlds, sometimes you learn from the existing condition, and sometimes what you interpret in abstraction is very similar to actually that condition.
The absolute, which is a curious concept, a curious word, but I actually thought rather than talking about the iconic or the, however where else one wants to describe that, to think of the black square, and I know I've got the wrong slide because I should really have the 1915 black square, the one with the cracked surface.
It's okay.
This notion actually of the absolute, of making something which you can't reduce any further, which you can't go any further beyond. I think this little drawing, which is in the drawing room, where Malevich put the word village inside the drawing and says when you read the words, it tells you more than any drawing could ever do. That is a truly mind-boggling thing to be doing, I think, at that moment in time. So this notion of actually trying to come to an essence, to an absolute form. Is that a quest?
Yeah, that's possible. I think if he would have lived longer, he would have maybe tried other things. But I think, I mean, with the black square, I mean, I do like the crack one. You know, when we opened the black square in the Guggenheim, it was the most unbelievable palaver I mean, at 2 in the morning, all the curators had to be present to open the box, the crate of the black square. I mean, I just didn't get it, you know. I was busy. I mean, that show should have been filmed because no museum in the world would allow you to do what we did to the Guggenheim, apart from the central space. We decided to make all the not Malevich, but all the supremacist compositions, which we couldn't show, as vinyl on the floor and on the wall, and paint white on white and pink on white. And I discovered that even in their paint range, they have many whites. So if you look very closely, you can see it. And so there is these amazing masterpieces sitting by the walls while we discovered the way to put the vinyl on the floor was to use fairy liquid, like washing liquid, put it on the floor, then put vinyl and slide it like an ice lick across the gallery, and then stick it by pushing the water out. So there was this amazing, Rodchenkos and whatnot, and we were busy pressing on the floor. We had all these art handlers who were art students who couldn't believe this project. And in a way, actually, that part of the show was in a way more exciting than the finished thing. Yeah, I think to go back to the black square, you can't go nowhere in abstraction beyond that point. This is the most simplified version. Maybe white square on white is the next step, or it was, yeah.
Abstraction as an idea, which is, of course, you showed this image. It's one of those truly extraordinary photographs which every art history student knows. So 010 was this truly groundbreaking exhibition, a group exhibition. Malevich had one room. The only evidence that we have of the room is this one photograph which shows one corner, and of course we tried to get as many as we could. We got 10 out of the 12 that we know where they are, and showed them upstairs. Malevich never used the term abstraction. That is a much later imposition in a way on the work.
Yeah, I suppose at the time they wouldn't have a word like that.
No, he would always talk about inventing a new painterly realism. So this is a new painterly realism. The red square is a painterly realism of a peasant woman. Many of those works have additional titles that make some allusion to the fact that actually they do have a relation to reality. I don't think a relation of representation, but of actually building a new reality. Mm-hmm. This notion of actually making and to make a new reality, how is that in architecture?
Well, I think it's a very exciting one. It's much more difficult because as a painter and artist, you have control of your canvas. You can say what you want. In architecture, you have so many layers, and you have to have the client, whether it's a city or a private client. You have to have the city again to give you permission. You have to have the engineer going in. You have to have the budget people. There's too many layers. But I think it's still a very worthy endeavor to try to make a new reality. I think it's a very important one because our worlds constantly shift, and we have to, as these worlds shift, we have to adjust our thinking and our behavior. And we have to do that with our personal experience. People think I always behave the same way, but you have to always, personally, I can say from my personal experience, you have to always, every time there is a shift in your office or whatever, you have to adjust your thinking. And I think that to adjust the thinking of a kind of in terms of a city is a very important one. I have to say, I think London has lost enormous opportunities and radically adjusting these shifts, because they've had amazing possibilities, whether it's on the Olympic site, whether it's the King's Cross, or the enormous site in London, to actually make another idea. And what was interesting in the housing estates in the 50s, in the post-war, because of the war, they managed to say that, you know, there are new kind of urbanism. And the idea was that this urbanism would infiltrate the existing urbanism. And of course, it unfortunately became ghettoized. It becomes very isolated because it's walled. But if you walk within some of these estates, you can feel that there was then a radical shift. But it was never pushed to the limit because it was under the umbrella of social housing and was under the umbrella of a particular ghetto. And of course, it's done also with the rich ghettos, which are usually much worse because they don't have any experimentation whatsoever. They are much more, you know, conservative and so on. But I think there are opportunities, and that's why I think China is interesting. Now, people think, oh, you know, China. But actually, I mean, these two projects we've done, they are commercial projects. They would never be done here. Not because they're expensive or whatever. They would never allow anybody to do something in such a massive scale with a very new compositional program, with new program. I mean, I think that is really, you know, and I think, although in China, for example, if you go to Beijing, there are many sites developed as ensembles. And we took the idea of the ensemble, not to repeat the towers, but to make a new composition about maybe you do a valley, or you do atrias in a different way, or do the way you can open the site, you know, kind of really layer it, or whatever it is. The towers are no longer towers, they are mountains, or whatever. So I think that you can, I think in the West, I think the requirement to make a more radical shift is even more necessary, you know. If you look at New York or any of the American cities, the towers they have are, I mean, because the grid exists, but the towers, the whole idea of the tower is that to make a city within that space, like the Malevich tectonic, you know, early teens last century. So I think that it is even more necessary now to these, but it takes a long time.
Which leads brilliantly into the next question, which is dynamism. So the fact that when you talked about Hungerford Bridge, which looked incredibly exciting as a plan, and you repeatedly used the word exploding and explosions. So there's really something that goes. And this is, of course, exactly what Malevich did in his paintings and also in the way he arranged his paintings. You have this incredible force.
That is. But I mean, I see these as kind of flotations in space. You know, like, you know, they might not be in one plane. The idea that they are superimposed, like it could be in different planes, and that's why the idea of layering is also very important, because I see them as kind of superimposed planets over each other.
Purity was the next one, which we came to.
Yeah,
there's
the
whoosh,
whoosh.
And then it becomes white and white on white. Purity is a very curious concept when you relate. I mean, this was made in. They were made just after the October Revolution, so the world was anything from still and pure and quiet. It was a total mess, actually. Cities are messy. What is the relationship between purity and when you design a building? The city as a messy environment.
Well, I mean, I think that maybe it goes back to the idea of a kind of a tabula rasa, or a kind of a blank piece of paper. And that you start with a blank piece of paper, and as you go on, you add things. You add things to it. You know, I think that also, I mean, this may be more relevant to the those architects who do very simple things. But I think that the scale is important, because you can do simplicity in a small scale, in the interior, or a small project. But on a large scale, another thing occurs, which is much more, the space becomes more domineering. So it becomes more, the reverse is achieved in an urban scale. If you make a space like that in a very enormous scale, it is no longer minimalist. It becomes very authoritarian. It's very interesting how the shift in scale affects the meaning of the piece, I think. I mean, if you have a nice interior with a nice simple kitchen counter here, a sofa there, in a minimalist way, it's very beautiful. But if you do that on a large scale, it could be nice, but it's actually much more domineering. The object becomes more dominating in the space. But I think it also, in terms of detailing, you can achieve purity, or can, I mean, I think that I don't want people to interpret purity in the idea of political correctness that, we have to be not doing voluptuous, great things in the name of, whatever, economic problems or whatever it is.
I will ask you one last one, and we could do many more, and then we open it to the floor. The interplay between 2 and 3 dimensions, which of course was important, that in a way it seems such an obvious thing that you can turn suprematism into compositions by adding just a few lines into 3-dimensional space. There's always been this very fascinating play in your work and the challenge how to give visual expression to an idea, and you use painting to begin with. You have interesting ideas about drawings. There's computer drawing, but you also still talk very much about...
Yeah, I mean, the line drawings we did were, I think, very important. I have to say, I value more our line drawings, which were very meticulous. So apart from breaking models, I used to go around. There was a habit of drawing line drawings with crossing them. That was not allowed in the office. So I had to go around to every crossing and circle it. And the line drawings actually are much more powerful than the pen. And the paintings are beautiful because they're painted and whatever. There comes another layer with them because the painting you can do layering and everything. But with the line drawings we also did layering. And they were very abstract and very beautifully inked. I mean, nobody now can do them. That tradition of inking is completely gone. It's vanished. And so, but the important shift was apart from the plan, how you interpret a 3-dimensional drawing. And the idea was to show them in a very different way. So each project, we showed each project in 10 ways, from below, from above, from sideways, also very distorted views, isometrics, mixed with perspectives. I mean, I have some of the setup drawings still of all these line drawings, and it was a very complicated process.
Okay, I have to do one more.
But I did learn from their photographs, photography.
The last one, which I allow myself, then we open to the floor, is the question of the artist with a capital A. Malevich was an artist with a capital A. He was very self-aware of his role as an artist. He mostly painted for exhibitions, and you can see the exhibition begins with a self-portrait. There's another self-portrait halfway through in Suprematism. That's a friend of his, Puni. Then the exhibition ends again with a self-portrait. And of course, at the very end, using the potential of photography, Malevich very carefully staged the way he would be perceived at the end. What's it like to be an architect with a capital A?
I know. As an architect, I have to say, your daily life is so full of problems. There's no glamour to it at all. People think it's very exciting, but it's, honestly, it's not. I mean, it's only exciting in the moment you're thinking about a project. You and your team, or you're by yourself. But you are burdened constantly, whether it's the press or it's the client or trying to get more money or whatever it is. I I mean, people obviously think it's great because somebody gave me a present yesterday, which you can't see, which is me as a ring. And so that's it. That's the only glamorous part of my career.
I'm sure there's a little bit more to it.
No, I mean, it's fun, but I'm saying you are constantly, honestly, you're constantly worried about things that has to be done well. It's not easy. People think it must be after a certain time, it must be easy going and everything, but it isn't.
Any questions from the floor? There's if you just wait for one moment to get the microphone so that we can record it, that would be great.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether you saw mid-September before the climate meeting at the UN, there was a report that came out in terms of the climate and growth. And one of the major premises of that was that we have to get urban living right because that's going to really drive a lot of efficiency. So within that context, in these large structures that you were talking about that potentially you could put in the skyline of London, is there opportunity there?
To do what?
To make this a much more efficient city in terms of
sure
people living
is.
less?
I think there is not one responsibility. There are various responsibilities about the environment, and we have to look at all of them together. We can't look at one thing and ignore everything else. I think a city should be still operating. I think it should still be very beautiful. I think it should allow people to live in very nice places. And I think it should be very economical. So I think you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just focus on one thing and ignore the rest.
And those large structures can do that.
Well, I think, populations are growing. Like if you take London, I think it needs to be more urbanized. Otherwise, you destroy the countryside. So you have to make a choice. You either destroy the countryside or you go higher in London. There is no way about it. And actually, the policy in London is the reverse. The policy in London is to be quite squat and very dense. So if you look at all the new developments in London, they are very low, and you have very narrow streets, and you have very stuffy streets. And I would say it might be better to go higher and more airy to the city. Now, whether it's more ecological or not, I don't know. But I think you need to be more inventive with ecology and so on with the form of these buildings and the way you ventilate them and the way you place them next to each other. You need to kind of think about the planning of the city, not just use kind of village structure to build a major city like London.
Thank you, and I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
There's a question, third row here.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes,
Hi.
just keep talking.
I have a question for you about biomimicry. How can biomimicry influence architecture and specifically interior architecture?
What is biomimicry?
It's designed influenced by nature.
Oh, yes, okay. How can what?
I didn't get you.
How can it influence interior
How can it
architecture?
influence interior architecture?
What architecture?
Interior architecture.
Interior?
Yeah.
Well, you can do that, yeah. Yeah, of course. You can come to our gallery and see some of these objects, and if you call it biomimicry, it's a new word for me. I can biomimic everything now. No, I think you can. I think that, we always try to emulate nature in architecture. But it was very difficult to achieve. When I say I want to build a mountain, it's not literally a mountain. Or if I want to do a kind of a grotto. It's not literally a grotto, but it's the way these actually influence public spaces and how you deal with circulation and so on. And we do. I mean, you're welcome to come to our gallery. It's on Goswell Road, and they change it every few months, but you can see the interior.
Thank you.
It's open to the public, so you can.
Second row from the right. Perfect.
Hello. You've spoken about your interest in the transformation of London over a number of decades. Given the proximity of your offices to the Mount Pleasant site, which the mayor granted permission to build a rather
terrible.
mundane scheme on Friday, it's such an exciting site. Do you have any thoughts on its potential development or any ambitions for that
Actually,
site?
we wrote to the mayor's office when they were renovating that site, proposing that we could do a study for it, and they told us to fuck off. I mean, it wasn't the mayor, to be honest. I just saw yesterday. It was always very jolly, and improvises a lot, you know. And but honestly, I mean, I think, but it's not that one side, which I think, and I had a row with my partner in the office yesterday, partner Patrick, who escaped coming here today, that we should, in the office, which used to do this work with students, to do these studies on these sites, that we should do it in the office. We have enough people there who are vacationing sometimes, or on the internet, that we should do these proposals for these sites. I personally think it's something which interests me enormously, not just in London, but in London in particular. And I do drive around all day myself. I have to say, nobody allowed me a key to the car, because they think I'll have road rage. You know, I'll be doing all sorts of funny things. But because I also think that, you know, by telling the car to do something, it would do it, not knowing how to drive. So I think that and there are many of these sites. I mean, that site, King's Cross site, there are lots of really great sites which could have done with some imagination. And I don't want to criticize the architects for the Mount Pleasant site, but I think it's and the other street, which I think is very important, is Farringdon Road. There are very major buildings being built on Farringdon Road, enormous, which will impact on it in an enormous way. So there are lots of possibilities, but there isn't a debate in London, you know. Unfortunately, the schools of architecture here are interested in only very esoteric stuff. You know, they don't believe, there is no connection between practice and education, which is unlike the European universities and maybe some American universities. I think it's very important to be experimental, but to be experimental with a side which people can also relate to, show what you can do with these extreme ideas on these particular sites. And it might not happen within 10 years, it might happen in 20 years, you know, or 30 years. So I think there are important discourses, and they should be open. RIBA should be interested in talking about them, or whatever.
Well, why do you think it is that London and Britain in general is so complacent in talking about architecture and the built environment?
I think that I think part of the problem in the UK is that the dynamic here is based, rightly or wrongly, on corporate work. You know, it's all led by developers, which is fine because they build the buildings, and whether it's housing or, you know. Well, I think the debate in certain places, like in Europe, where there are competitions for all the museums and so on, I think that it's a kind of different dynamic. And I think that, you know, the RIBA and the schools of architecture should take the lead in this discussion. You know, and the press are my favorite people. They should be, because they see they don't discuss, the press did not discuss commercial buildings. And London is mostly done, 89%, you know, is done of commercial projects. Mm. I mean, there's a Tate project, that's one. I don't know how many other museums are being done here. Not many. So if they only talk about the cultural buildings, they're not going to, oh, the design museum, sorry. How could I forget you, Diane? But it's an existing building, that's why. And no, but you know, I think there are not many of those projects. So if the press did not avoid talking about what's happening to London because it's all commercial buildings or any other city in the world, then they can't talk about anything. They're going to talk about some very kind of strange stuff. So they have reverted to political correctness about doing strange stuff in, I don't know, Venezuela or somewhere.
Do we have one or two maximum more questions?
Hi, just a quick question. You've worked on other projects, like you've designed shoes, tables. What other projects would you like to work on in the future, or what projects are you currently working on outside of architecture?
Whatever they give me. I don't know. I realized, a long time ago, that all designers can do anything they want as long as they know the technique. I think the most important thing is the skill and the technique of that particular thing you're doing. Whether it's a shoe or a handbag or... obviously my favorite thing is to do buildings, but still, I would like to do jewelry, whatever.
Do you have a favorite object you designed?
No. I'm sure I do. I ring. My rings, I like the rings. And some of the furniture pieces are very nice. We've done new pieces which are kind of carved marble pieces, are kind of interesting. And, some of the tables we've done. But I don't necessarily preference. I think also it'd be nice if there was an environment and of all the objects kind of working together.
One over there.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, hi. I really appreciated the way in which sort of a through line of this entire talk was about the revolutionary potential of beauty. And you spoke very appreciatively of the way in which revolutionary ideas sort of propelled your own career, and namely your father's. So I want to ask you a sort of a sensitive question. Recently, you have come under fire by your favorite people, the press, for sort of distancing yourself from working conditions on, namely your construction sites in Qatar.
Let me stop you. The writer was sued?
Yes, no, I understand that he got... no, excuse me, I understand that he got...
And he had to retract his mistake?
Oh, of course, no, I understand. Yeah. I understand that he made a huge mistake.
I said what I said at the time.
Oh, no, sure. So I sort of want
let me
to...
just finish.
I want to...
What I'm saying is that as much as I would like to sit in Qatar and watch every builder, I have absolutely no control over it. People think I'm Engineer Jolie wandering around the universe talking on behalf of the builders. I would like to do that, but I don't. Unfortunately, they give me too much power. I don't have that power.
No, I understand, and I didn't mean to. I understand that you are a very busy person, a very difficult position.
It's nothing to do with busyness. It's to do with empowerment. If I was empowered to help, I would.
But could I please just broaden the question? Just because I understand that it's also, I guess, more recently the Guggenheim has also come under fire for employing construction companies whose labor practices are a little less than ideal. So I wanted to ask what you could say about the responsibility of either you talked about your own responsibility, but of the art institution, that does an artist with a capital A or an art institution with a capital A have a responsibility towards the people, or how can they exercise?
I'm not doing the Guggenheim. I'm sure they have a responsibility, but I can't talk for them. Unfortunately, I don't know the full story. I'm not on the ground. I don't know whether the workers are treated badly or not badly. I can't tell you. I'm not there.
Yeah, just an opinion, though.
No, I'm sorry. No. Any last one? Over there, in the middle.
What do you think are the materials of the future for making buildings? Like glass appeared and then many buildings became made of glass.
I think we've used a lot of the kind of fiber concrete, for example, in Baku, where you can mold everything. I think that now with 3D printing, you can almost 3D print an object. We might actually do that on a project in London. I think that, material research has been amazing. And, thermally heated glass. But, the thing is, the construction is still concrete structure, steel structure, and the other materials are all kind of to do with, cladding. So maybe eventually they will use other material for structure. It will come. But I think there's a lot of very interesting material research around which one can use. We've done that, as I said, in different projects, whether in the Innsbruck project where thermally heated glass, or the fiber concrete in Baku and other places.
I think it's time. I mean, we could probably ask endless more questions. It's really interesting. Zaha, thank you very, very much.
Oh, no, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.